when we see the modernized law firms, we can maybe perceive that they go through the transition process slightly better, so they have more systems in place to cope quicker with that. I think almost, for the projects that at least currently I'm doing with Lexington, pretty much 75% they are founder-led law firms or founder group law firms. Even if they're second generations, some of them they're family-owned as well. So they don't have those systems in place. Service delivery is not systematized, and client relationship is not systematized. So that creates not only a challenge in the transition process for the COVID situation or anything but again, what happened when they come to us and they said, okay, I'm 60, 65, I'm getting tired. And I cannot see who is my second generation that is going to take over the leadership. So the amount of work required to modernize that firm is pretty big. So what would you think are the main steps to follow from that situation?
One thing we're finding, and of course it's a huge contradiction, is you've got the founders saying to the junior partners, look, the door is open, or here's the keys to the Mercedes, I'm willing to invite you in. And then you've got the junior partners, the sort of next generation partners, saying we're not being allowed in, we're not being listened to. And I think that is a key contradiction. And some of the founders that say to us that they're willing to give the keys to the Mercedes to the next generation are very guilty of one day waking up and saying, actually, I want to be more involved in the firm. So there's such huge ambiguity, both in what the founder is trying to achieve and how they pass the next generation, and also in the aims of expectations of the next generation. Are they really willing and able to invest what's required to become the next generation of leaders?
One, I think, big issue, picking up on the point about appraisals, reviews, processes, and so on, is thinking about the pipeline of development. And I think one issue that firms need to address is this isn't something you can do overnight. So if you have, for example, a partner who is the founder of an organization, he or she will have managed it as well as being a great lawyer. They may legitimately feel that they are excellent managers and therefore they don't need help from their colleagues, with the result that the more juniors, whether they're partners or associates, may justifiably focus on being great technical lawyers and not therefore either thinking they need to or being allowed to develop their managerial skills. And I think it's important to think in terms of, if you like, a pair of triangles. So when you're a young lawyer, you will focus on developing your technical skills. Over time, you will refine them, but it will become, if I can put it this way, a narrower range of knowledge you acquire. Conversely, if you think of an inverted triangle next to it, at the bottom of that inverted triangle, at the point, that will be your business skills. But you, over time, need to develop those to a much wider extent. And I think that can take several years. And I think any firm needs to have a process by which they take their lawyers from being really good technical lawyers with some managerial skills to outstanding technical lawyers with a broad range of solid managerial skills. And that means that the founders can look around to their colleagues and say, well, actually, X is clearly an excellent manager. He can take over this group, this office, if that's appropriate, and they can be tested before they end up as, for example, managing partner.
There's also addressing the issue of the ambiguity of the founder, because the founders are all really impressive people. They're great lawyers, they're strong personalities, they have built a firm. And on one side, intellectually, they're saying, I need to pass this on to the next generation. Often there are conversations within a family where they say, actually, you really time to step down to enjoy our retirement. So intellectually, rationally, that's one view. And emotionally, it's handing over their baby. It's a really interesting ambiguity which people often need help in overcoming.
I think there's also another point there, and we're talking about sort of systems, which is what has done very well for a founder-led firm may not necessarily be the right model to take that firm to the next stage. And I think there's a big disjunct in what I see from the conversations I have. The mindset of an individual who's grown something from scratch with all the characteristics you've outlined to the kind of, and it's probably a team that takes that step change to the next thing. So it does come down to, as you were saying, Mary, systems and models, which is not necessarily the skill set that has got the firm to where it needs to be. The other thing I'd like to just bring in, which occurred to me as you were talking, Tony, is when you're thinking about the pipeline, absolutely, I think the focus is on lawyers, good lawyers, etc., and then building that kind of the inverted triangle. But once a firm or any entity really gets to a certain size, what are the ancillary players you need to take that firm to that level? So thinking about business services people, thinking about all of the other range, particularly now, some of this can be addressed by technology, but a lot of it is just around the people and process. If we think of that kind of that old people process platforms, thinking about what kinds of processes will take a firm to the next stage, you probably won't have them because you haven't needed them to get to where you are. How do you think about that? What do you need to put in place to move up to that larger, more complex way of operating?
I agree with that. I think one of the major changes, if you like, that transitioning firms need to think about is that they may have the partners managed everything. As they get bigger, as they transition to the next stage, as you say, Stuart, they will employ business services experts in different areas, HR, finance, IT, etc. And I think the partner's mindset, if it's possible, needs to change from being involved in everything to being people who focus on perhaps the bigger picture strategic issues and allow some of the operational issues to be handled by expert professional services.
And the questions we're seeing amongst firms is, are the partners willing to be led? And if they're willing to be led, who are they willing to be led by? So there's a transition, as we were hearing, these very strong, charismatic and successful founders. Often the next stage is to devolve that authority and have a consensus. And we work with a lot of firms at this consensus period. They all talk about collegiality. What's really interesting, I'm now understanding that when we talk about a collegial firm, there's some positive aspects of that work. Often people like working together. But the negative side of that collegiality seems to be that they're not willing to hold each other accountable to what they say they will be held accountable for. So you go through this consensus period to get you away from the founder, but at what stage do you click into some kind of delegated authority where you have a stronger management team, some planning behind that, where partners are willing to give up some of that autonomy and in parallel say, this is what I'm willing to be held accountable for, this is what I'm delegating to those managers and those professionals that know how to run law firm better than I do. Because we do see when people bring in the business professionals at the first stage, that is often set up to fail because law firms will bring in, they're very guilty of bringing in very able, very expensive people, not allowing them to do what they can do. And we know that that is really a learning process. And there are some dead bodies in the history of law firms as they go through that learning process until they allow some of those professionals with a delegated partner leader to actually do some of this really important stuff, which is central to that modern law firm.